In April 2012, the lifeless body of 36-year-old Eric Mathis was found in the kitchen of his home in Jacksonville, North Carolina. What initially seemed like a domestic altercation soon unraveled into a sinister narrative of betrayal and manipulation. Investigators delved into Eric's complex life, uncovering his marriage to Marine veteran Rebecca Mathis and his clandestine affair with co-worker Heather Crowley. In March 2012, the serene suburban streets near Camp Lejeune became the setting for a chain of events that culminated in murder. On the morning of April 2, 2012, at precisely 7:45 a.m., the tranquil atmosphere of the Jacksonville neighborhood was shattered by the unmistakable crack of gunfire. The area, usually filled with the hum of lawnmowers, children's laughter, and the faint cadence of Marine drills from the nearby base, was jolted awake. Across the street, Mrs. Lillian Parker, a retired schoolteacher tending her garden, froze when she heard the shots. Looking up, she spotted something that sent a chill through her. Rebecca Mathis, a decorated Marine veteran and a familiar face in the neighborhood, sitting on her porch. Rebecca was unnervingly still, leaning back against the porch railing, a cigarette smoldering between her fingers. Her face was eerily calm, but her blood-stained hands told a story no words could deny. Mrs. Parker hesitated before dialing 911, her gaze flickering back to Rebecca, hoping her eyes had deceived her. Yet Rebecca made no effort to call for help or explain herself. Her composure in the midst of such chaos was as chilling as the scene itself. When officers arrived, the atmosphere grew heavier. Rebecca remained seated, her eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the row of houses. Blood smeared her hands, drying in the morning light. She didn't resist as officers approached, nor did she flinch when they placed her in handcuffs. Silent and unyielding, she rose and followed them without protest. Inside the house, the officers found a grim confirmation of their fears. Eric Mathis lay sprawled on the kitchen floor near the counter, his body in a twisted, unnatural position as though he had been caught mid-step. A shattered whiskey glass lay beside him, its contents mixing with his blood on the gleaming white tiles. His torso bore the unmistakable marks of rage, 5 bullet wounds. A handgun rested a few feet away, its barrel still warm. The scene painted a picture of explosive fury, a confrontation that spiraled into deadly violence. Forensics teams quickly began their work. The normally tidy, welcoming home had transformed into a stark crime scene. Yellow evidence markers dotted the kitchen, highlighting bullet casings and blood spatters. The rest of the house remained pristine, untouched, as though time itself had frozen outside the confines of that fatal moment. On April 3, 2012, the medical examiner's report confirmed the officer's suspicions. Eric had been shot at close range, 5 precise shots. This was no chaotic exchange of gunfire, but a deliberate act, calculated and deeply personal. The placement of the wounds suggested an intense emotional motive. Rebecca was brought in for questioning later that day. The sterile, clinical interrogation room seemed designed to unnerve, yet Rebecca appeared unfazed. Her posture was rigid, her hands resting loosely on the table. Her military training was evident in her composed, unflinching demeanor. But her eyes held a haunting stillness, betraying an undercurrent of something deeper. When asked to recount the events, her answers were curt, detached, as though she were narrating someone else's story. But when the questioning shifted to motive, her response was as chilling as it was simple. "He betrayed me," she said. No elaboration, no excuses, just those 3 words. The officers, seasoned in uncovering deception and hidden motives, were taken aback by the straightforwardness of Rebecca's statement. It wasn't a confession of guilt, not precisely. Instead, it felt like a declaration of truth, delivered with a simplicity that seemed to explain everything. But in reality, it explained nothing. They knew better than to accept such matters at face value. As days turned into weeks, the investigation took on a life of its own. By April 12, 2012, detectives had pieced together a thread that unraveled the complexities of Eric Mathis's secret life. It began with Rebecca's laptop, found open on the kitchen counter. Within its browsing history lay damning evidence, emails and text messages between Eric and a co-worker, Heather Crowley. The messages left little to the imagination. They spoke of stolen nights, whispered promises, and dreams of a future that excluded the life Eric had built with Rebecca. Heather, a lively woman in her late 20s, had been more than just a colleague to Eric. She represented freedom from the rigid, disciplined world he shared with his wife. Their affair, detectives discovered, had been ongoing for months, painting Eric as a man juggling two separate lives, one with his decorated, disciplined wife, and the other with a carefree younger lover. For Rebecca, it wasn't just the infidelity that cut deep. It was the deception. The years of trust built through their marriage now lay in ruins, tainted by lies and betrayal. Detectives presented this evidence to Rebecca's legal team, who wasted no time building a defense. They argued that these revelations provided critical context for Rebecca's actions, that her crime was not premeditated, but a reaction born of raw, overwhelming emotion. The prosecution, however, had a different interpretation. To them, the affair was motive enough to suggest Rebecca had acted with calculated intent. On April 12th, officers returned to the once quiet neighborhood, this time armed with an arrest warrant. Rebecca, who had been staying with a friend, opened the door without resistance. Her expression was unchanged, just as it had been in the days following the shooting. She neither protested nor showed emotion. Instead, she extended her hands, allowing the handcuffs to snap into place. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, yet questions lingered. What drove Rebecca to that breaking point? Was it fury, heartbreak, or something even deeper, something darker? The answers lay hidden in the years leading up to that morning, buried in the unspoken tensions and concealed secrets of a marriage that had been built on a fragile foundation. For now, all anyone could do was wait as the case moved closer to trial, each detail revealing another layer of a chilling tale of betrayal and bloodshed. Rebecca Mathis was the kind of woman people admired from a distance. At 32, her life appeared to be a testament to strength, discipline, and achievement. She was a decorated Marine Corps veteran, a combat medic who had served 2 grueling tours in Iraq. On the battlefield, she was a beacon of calm amidst chaos, rushing to the aid of the wounded while others sought cover. Her colleagues often spoke of her sharp instincts and unwavering courage. To them, she wasn't just a soldier, she was a symbol of resilience. But behind her composed exterior, Rebecca carried wounds no one could see. Her childhood in a small Tennessee town had been marred by turmoil and pain. She endured years of physical and emotional abuse at the hands of her father, a man whose volatile temper often turned violent. Her mother, paralyzed by fear, remained in the household, leaving Rebecca to shield herself and her younger brother from harm. It was this chaotic upbringing that propelled Rebecca to join the Marines. The Corps offered her structure, a sense of purpose, and a way to escape the cycle of abuse that had defined her early years. By 2004, after her first deployment, Rebecca was already a rising star in the military. That same year, she met Eric Mathis. Eric seemed to embody everything Rebecca thought she needed. Like her, he was a Marine, charismatic, driven, and armed with a smile that could light up a room. He understood her in ways others couldn't. Within months of meeting, they were married. To friends and colleagues, they were a power couple, 2 strong, ambitious individuals navigating life together. But behind closed doors, the cracks in their seemingly perfect union were beginning to show. Navigating the challenges of military life had forged a strong bond between Rebecca and Eric Mathis. Or so it seemed. Beneath the surface of their relationship, cracks were quietly forming. Rebecca was haunted by the scars of war, struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder after her second deployment. The harrowing memories of lives she couldn't save and comrades lost on the battlefield replayed in her mind during moments of quiet. Nights often ended with her waking up drenched in sweat, echoes of gunfire and screams pulling her from sleep. Eric, who had once been her unwavering support, began to drift away. He didn't know how to handle the depth of her pain, and rather than confronting it, he withdrew. Having left active duty shortly after their marriage, Eric transitioned into a civilian role as a defense contractor. This new job freed him from the demanding life of a Marine, but brought with it new distractions and temptations. Late nights at the office and frequent business trips became the norm. It was during one of those long nights that he met Heather Crowley. Heather embodied everything Rebecca wasn't, young, carefree, and unburdened by the weight of past battles. Their connection began innocently enough, with shared jokes over coffee and late-night conversations about work. But it wasn't long before their relationship deepened into a full-blown affair. For Eric, Heather became more than just a passing fling. She was an escape from the challenges of his marriage, a way to reclaim the excitement and passion he felt had faded. But Eric's betrayal went beyond emotional infidelity. Investigators would later uncover that he had been secretly draining their joint bank account to finance Heather's lifestyle. Lavish dinners, high-end hotel stays, and expensive gifts, all paid for with money Rebecca had trusted him to manage. Rebecca stumbled upon the truth in March 2012. She wasn't looking for it. It came to her as though fate demanded she know. One evening, while working on her laptop, an email notification appeared. The subject line seemed harmless, but the content was damning. The message was from Heather, and the words within left no room for doubt. Explicit exchanges, detailed plans for secret meetings, it was all there, laid bare on the screen. Rather than confront Eric immediately, Rebecca began to strategize. Her military training had taught her the importance of patience and careful planning. She buried her emotions, replaying the betrayal over and over in her mind while maintaining an outward appearance of normalcy. Each day, she watched Eric dig himself deeper into his web of lies, and with each passing moment, her resentment festered. The tension in their home reached a boiling point on the evening of April 1st, 2012. Eric arrived home late, reeking of perfume that wasn't Rebecca's. His shirt was wrinkled, as though hastily put back on. Rebecca said nothing, silently observing. That night, she lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling as her mind churned with thoughts of betrayal, anger, and heartbreak. By the next morning, April 2nd, 2012, everything came to a head. Rebecca had been up for hours, pacing the kitchen as she waited for Eric to come downstairs. When he finally appeared, she confronted him. Her voice was steady, her words measured. She demanded answers about Heather, about the stolen money, about the lies. At first, Eric tried to deny everything, but Rebecca had gathered enough evidence to corner him. His denial soon turned to anger, then to ridicule. He mocked her, blaming her for his actions and accusing her of being too broken to love. It was then that something inside Rebecca shattered. The years of pain, betrayal, and suppressed anger surged to the surface. Her eyes fell on Eric's Glock, carelessly left on the counter. Without thinking, she grabbed it. The first shot missed, shattering a glass behind him, but the next 5 struck their target. Each pull of the trigger was a release, a culmination of years of emotional torment. Eric collapsed to the floor, his final words a cruel, cutting whisper meant to wound her even in his final moments. As the sound of gunfire faded, Rebecca stood frozen. The weight of what she had done pressed down on her, but she didn't cry or scream. She calmly placed the gun on the counter, walked outside, and lit a cigarette as the world around her slowly began to stir. The investigation that followed unraveled a deeply layered tragedy. Detective Daniel Hayes, a seasoned investigator, was immediately struck by the complexities of the case. He sensed there was far more to the story than a simple act of rage or a crime of passion. His rookie partner watched and learned as Hayes began to piece together the chilling details of betrayal, heartbreak, and a fractured life pushed past its breaking point. Samantha Clark brought a fresh perspective to the investigation, carefully piecing together Eric's financial deceit, his lies, and the immense emotional toll these had taken on Rebecca. While Rebecca's confession was straightforward, the evidence uncovered a deeper narrative, one of betrayal, manipulation, and the devastating cost of broken trust. The investigation had only begun, but the truths it exposed would leave everyone involved shaken to their core. As the inquiry into Eric Mathis's death deepened, detectives unearthed a far more complex web of deception than they had initially anticipated. What first appeared to be a straightforward crime of passion began to reveal hidden layers of financial misconduct, emotional betrayal, and manipulation, painting a much more intricate picture of the lives entangled in this tragic event. The pivotal breakthrough came in late April 2012. Detective Daniel Hayes, scrutinizing Eric's financial records, identified a series of suspicious transactions. Once hailed as a competent defense contractor, Eric had been covertly funneling money into offshore accounts. These transfers were small enough to evade immediate detection, but substantial enough to prompt serious questions. Initially, Hayes suspected Eric had acted alone. However, further investigation revealed Heather Crowley, the woman central to Eric's infidelity, was deeply involved. Heather, who had initially portrayed herself as an innocent caught in a tragic love triangle, quickly emerged as a key figure. Financial records and correspondence revealed that Eric had been funding Heather's lifestyle under the guise of business expenses. Luxury vacations, designer clothing, and even a leased car were all paid for with money siphoned from illicit dealings. Heather's name appeared repeatedly in emails and transaction logs, revealing her as more than just a passive participant. She had profited significantly from Eric's schemes, raising serious doubts about her innocence. Detectives began to suspect she had been complicit in not only Eric's financial fraud, but also the emotional manipulation of Rebecca. New questions arose. Had Heather encouraged Eric to exploit Rebecca financially? How much had she known about their crumbling marriage, and what role had she played in its disintegration? Meanwhile, investigators uncovered additional layers of complexity as they examined Rebecca's mental state. During a search of the house, they found her journals neatly stacked in a drawer in the guest room where Rebecca had been sleeping in the weeks leading up to Eric's death. These journals provided a raw and unfiltered glimpse into Rebecca's state of mind, documenting the emotional devastation she experienced after discovering Eric's betrayal. In her journal entries, Rebecca detailed the deep sense of betrayal and heartbreak she felt. Her words painted the picture of a woman grappling with the disintegration of her marriage and the unraveling of the life she had fought so hard to build. She described sleepless nights filled with doubt, anger, and confusion, wondering how the man she trusted could have deceived her so profoundly. What stood out most to detectives were the entries outlining her plans to confront Eric. These pages weren't filled with violent thoughts, but rather a meticulous plan to expose his lies. Rebecca had listed questions she wanted to ask, evidence she planned to show, and how she hoped he would react. These journals became a cornerstone of her defense, portraying her as a woman pushed to her breaking point rather than a calculated killer. Her attorneys argued that the entries showed someone desperately trying to regain control of her life, not someone premeditating murder. They highlighted how Eric's betrayal had exacerbated Rebecca's PTSD, leaving her emotionally fragile and vulnerable. By May 2012, Heather's role in the case took a dramatic turn. Initially presenting herself as a naive victim of Eric's deceit, new evidence painted a starkly different picture. Text messages between Heather and Eric revealed a troubling pattern of manipulation. In one exchange, Heather encouraged Eric to pressure Rebecca into filing for divorce, using her mental health as justification. The evidence suggested Heather had actively worked to destabilize Rebecca, furthering her own interests. This revelation led to Heather's arrest. The carefully crafted image of an innocent bystander crumbled as she was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud. Heather's testimony became a pivotal moment in the case, as her involvement in Eric's schemes and her role in the events leading to his death were laid bare. Rebecca's trial began in October 2012, attracting national attention. Each day, the courtroom was packed with spectators eager to see how the case would unfold. The defense focused on Rebecca's decorated military service, her battle with PTSD, and the emotional abuse she endured. They argued that her actions, while tragic, were the result of overwhelming betrayal and mental health struggles, not premeditation. The prosecution, however, leaned heavily on Rebecca's journals. They framed her detailed entries as evidence of intent, arguing that she had carefully thought through her confrontation with Eric and took matters into her own hands when the confrontation didn't go as she planned. To them, she was a woman who had been pushed to the edge, but ultimately made a deliberate choice to kill. The most dramatic moment came during Heather's cross-examination. The defense attorney systematically dismantled her claims of innocence, exposing her manipulative behavior and her role in Eric's fraudulent activities. Heather's cold, detached demeanor under questioning only reinforced the defense's portrayal of her as a calculating accomplice. On the witness stand, Heather's testimony did little to paint her in a sympathetic light. Instead, it reinforced the defense's claim that she had played a pivotal role in Eric's betrayal of Rebecca. Her demeanor, cold and detached, only strengthened the argument that she had been a driving force behind the deception and emotional torment Rebecca had endured. In November 2012, after weeks of gripping testimony, the jury finally reached its decision. Rebecca was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter, a lesser charge that acknowledged her fragile mental state and the emotional provocation leading to her actions. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Rebecca's conviction became the subject of intense public debate. News outlets, social media platforms, and talk shows dissected every aspect of the case. To some, Rebecca was a tragic victim of emotional and psychological abuse, pushed to her breaking point by betrayal and manipulation. To others, she was a killer who had allowed her emotions to spiral out of control, with fatal consequences. The case also ignited broader discussions about veteran reintegration, mental health care, and the enduring scars of trauma. While in prison, Rebecca sought therapy for her PTSD and poured her energy into writing. In 2014, she published her memoir, Duty, Deception, and Despair, which became a national bestseller. In its pages, she recounted her life as a Marine, the betrayal she experienced in her marriage, and the harrowing events leading to Eric's death. The book struck a chord with readers, prompting important conversations about the invisible struggles many veterans face when they return home. Though her story was undeniably tragic, it offered society a lens to examine complex themes of love, trust, and betrayal. Even while incarcerated, Rebecca's voice resonated beyond the prison walls, challenging people to confront uncomfortable truths about human relationships and the thin line between love and destruction. On a dreary afternoon in 2020, nearly 8 years after the day Rebecca Mathis fired the fatal shots, the air inside the state correctional facility was thick and heavy. Rebecca sat in the visitor's room, her hands folded neatly on the table. Though her face bore the marks of time and hardship, there was still a quiet strength about her, a reminder of her military roots. Detective Daniel Hayes sat across from her. He had been there from the beginning, piecing together the tangled web of lies and betrayal that led to Eric's death. Over the years, Hayes had replayed that day in 2012 countless times. He couldn't forget the sight of Rebecca sitting calmly on her porch, blood staining her hands, yet her expression composed. Despite all he had learned, one lingering question haunted him. Today, he had come to ask it. Their conversation began cordially. Rebecca spoke about her progress in therapy, her writing, and how she had worked to rebuild herself despite her circumstances. She shared how her memoir had sparked national discussions about PTSD, betrayal, and the emotional toll of war. But Hayes couldn't let go of that image of her, calm and collected on the day of the murder. It didn't align with an act of blind rage. Finally, he asked the question that had been weighing on him for years. Rebecca's response was measured, her tone steady. She didn't elaborate, nor did she attempt to justify her actions. Her simple yet chilling reply sent a shiver down Hayes's spine. It didn't bring clarity. Instead, it deepened the mystery. Her words suggested a truth she had carried with her all along, one far more profound and unsettling than the evidence had ever revealed. As Hayes left the prison, Rebecca's words echoed in his mind. She wasn't easily categorized as a victim or a perpetrator. Her calm acknowledgement of what she had done hinted at a darkness he couldn't fully understand, a complexity that defied simple explanations. Rebecca returned to her daily routine,